that now.
That's all I came to say.
Perfect. All right, so we're just gonna fly through this. Wanted to do a quick kind of overview of our advocacy training that we typically do, just so that folks have a good idea of how we can go about these meetings whenever you're meeting with representatives, and then kind of go through what to expect for that day. A lot of folks have never been to the General Assembly before, and it can be a little bit daunting if you've never done so before, because these are people who are making decisions every single day, sometimes good decisions, most of the times bad decisions, about laws in our state and things that impact our community. So it can be a little bit daunting to have these conversations, but we've kind of created a training to help you do that, kind of a blueprint for these meetings, and then wanted to go through what to expect as far as navigating the NCGA and how to make this a really successful advocacy day. So in case you were unaware, June 11th, which is next Tuesday, which also happens to be my birthday, so we'll be celebrating multiple things on June 11th, is HIV Speaks on Jones Street, which is our annual advocacy day. So quickly, we'll do an advocacy 101, kind of how we set up these policy meetings. We'll quickly go over our policy priorities just to kind of give you all a head start so that you'll have an idea going into these meetings on Tuesdays as to what you want to be addressing with legislators. We'll go through meeting roles whenever we're in these meetings. We'll go have an overview of what the schedule will look like for the day, and then talk briefly about how to navigate around the NC General Assembly, especially for folks who are coming in from out of town. So very simply, advocacy is a chance to talk about and bring public awareness to issues that are important to you. So for us, and I assume many of the people on the call and our organization, this is to bring a name and a face and voice to the HIV community and talk about issues that impact people living with HIV, people impacted by HIV, as well as viral hepatitis, harm reduction, LGBTQ issues, a whole slew of things. But this is a chance to really bring public awareness and raise issues about the topics that are really important to us. It's also a chance to really represent your community from your neck of the woods in North Carolina and those impacted by your cause. These people that we're going to be talking with on Tuesday come from your district. So we are setting up meetings with your specific representative, House of Representative, and Senator. So they're there to hear about what's going on in their communities and to help guide the decisions they make when it comes to making policies for the state of North Carolina. But also it is a chance to put a face to a cause and share your personal story or experience about how HIV has impacted you and why this is an important issue for you. And then ultimately is to make a change, to make good policy for people who are living with and impacted by HIV throughout North Carolina. So when it comes to accomplishing policy change, there's a couple of things that are important to think through. What is it that you want? What kind of policy do you want to have happen? Why do you think it's important for that policy to happen? Who has what person or institution has the power to give that policy change to you? And then how will you build credibility with and get access to those power brokers in order to make influence in their decision making? So for us, we've got a couple of policy priorities that we will talk through. We want them because we know that they would help benefit the HIV community. Luckily, for a lot of the things we're trying to advance, the NCGA are the people who are making these decisions and have access to the resources and the decision making when it comes to the finances that happen throughout the state. And through this, we're able to build these relationships and credibility with those legislators. So there's three kind of big ways that we think about advocacy. There's direct advocacy, where you have a voice at the Capitol, which is the General Assembly, to provide information, negotiate with stakeholders, and count votes. There's media advocacy, so you can influence decision makers via like think pieces or letters to the editor or opinion pieces. And then grassroots advocacy, which is working in the community to really recruit and inform and activate members of the community. So these are kind of the three ways that we like to go about policy change. So particularly with this event, we're looking at grassroots advocacy, organizing our communities, and then direct advocacy, where we can take our communities to the General Assembly and advance policy that matters to us. Now, these are kind of the three big policy priorities that we're looking at for this year. I will note, and I will also mention this for HIV Speaks on Jones Street Day, that this is a short session, so largely the only things that are being advanced are related to the budget. Now, I'm sure that y'all have seen a lot of news about other things that are happening in the General Assembly where they're adding on bad legislation to pre-existing legislation that's carried over from last year. But for the most part, there is not going to be a lot of new legislation that's introduced. So it's largely a defensive year, an educational year, and just making sure that they are aware of things that are happening within our community. Because new HIV specific legislation is likely not to be introduced. So first and foremost is to support and continue to fund the HIV medication assistance program. As I'm sure many of y'all know, with Medicaid expansion, a lot of folks will be moving from the HIV medication assistance program over to Medicaid, but the HIV medication assistance program, or HMAP as we call it, is still an extremely important program for folks who may still not be eligible for Medicaid, and help them to get not only their HIV medications, but in a lot of circumstances through the state coverage for their premiums for full health insurance. So we know how important that program is and want to make sure that the legislature continues to support and fund that HIV medication assistance program. Next is, of course, supporting syringe service programs. And ultimately, our goal is to streamline the Good Samaritan law, which is a law that allows for folks to call the 911 in case there is an accidental overdose that they're around. And then ultimately, it keeps them from being arrested because of being on the scene of this. With the way that our law is written, it's not super clear. People are still afraid to call 911. So we are still seeing a really high rate of able to be reversed overdose deaths. So we need to streamline our Good Samaritan law. There has been a lot of news over the past couple of days about a really bad piece of legislation called House Bill 250 that is expanding what the death by distribution law is. So ultimately, if someone dies of an overdose, the person that they got the drug from can be charged with a murder charge because of getting the providing them with those drugs, which we know that incarceration is not the way forward to prevent overdose deaths. So we're going to kind of change this language a little bit, but just so y'all are aware. And then, of course, increase access to prevention services like pre-exposure prophylaxis and post-exposure prophylaxis. These might change a little bit between now and Tuesday. We're still kind of fine-tuning the words, but just so y'all have kind of an idea of what we're going to be talking to legislators about and educating them on Tuesday. All right, now we're going to quickly go over our meeting roles. So what we've done is we've kind of, and please forgive the noise in the background, my cat is having the zoomies and is running all over the place. So if you hear thumping around, it's the cat. Nothing is amiss. We've kind of broken up the way that we go about these meetings into 5 key roles that can kind of help people navigate these meetings and serve as a blueprint so that you can go into your meeting with a representative and have a clear path of what is being covered. It also helps keep things on track. Sometimes these legislators like to take the conversation a little off track, and this kind of helps set a blueprint to where you're able to really guide where the conversation goes. So our 5 key roles are introducer, storyteller, fact knower, note taker, and social media magician. I think the social media person, someone who's going to be in charge of social media. So the first 3 I will note are normally for people who are a little bit more on the extroverted side. The last 2 are for people who, even though I'm giving a presentation, are more like me and a little bit more introverted. So we'll go through each of them. Excuse me. First and foremost is the introducer, and you are very simply that. You are there to introduce your group, introduce your cause, and be the first kind of point of contact with the representative. So the introducer is the first impression that you're going to leave with your audience, and your job is to introduce yourself, the people in your group, and then why you're there and advocating and what you're advocating about. It's important that the introducer, because they're the first person you see, is friendly and approachable and is able to be heard. And also this role, even though you are just kind of introducing the group, also works really well and naturally as a moderator or facilitator to help kind of guide the conversation if it starts going a little astray. And like I said, you'll need to help redirect the conversation because, like it or not, sometimes these representatives kind of take the conversation into their own hands, and the introducer is able to kind of bring it back on track and talk about what we're actually there to talk about. Next is the storyteller, whose job it is to give a heartfelt description of why this subject matter is important to you by using a personal story or what it is that brings them personally into this advocacy. So it's important to make it personal and just be yourself. And because you're going to have several meetings throughout the day, the storyteller doesn't always have to be the same person. The introducer doesn't always have to be the same person. And it doesn't have to be the same story every time. But the most important thing is that we want the story to be real, because it's the most effective when it's real and relatable. So it doesn't have to be long, dramatic. It just needs to come from you and your life experience. And this is really the meat and potatoes of the conversation, to really put a face and a story to our cause. Now, unfortunately, in the world that we live in, stories don't always resonate with everybody. So it's important to also have someone who can be kind of a fact knower, who knows the numbers and the science of what's going on with your topic, to kind of back up the storyteller. It's good. Like I said, some policymakers are unfortunately more focused on the information rather than the personalization. So it's good to always kind of have this in your back pocket to follow along with the storyteller. So you want to make sure that you're using actual facts and numbers, of course, because we don't want to make stuff up, because it can always come back to bite you in the tush. And it's really simple that if you don't know the answer to a question that's asked, it's totally okay. You can be honest and say, I don't know that answer, but I can get it to you. And this is great because this gives us a chance to follow up with that representative if they have a question that you may not have been able to answer. So it not only keeps you from giving false information that you may not know the answer to, but it also kind of sows that seed so that we can continue to cultivate those relationships with those representatives and ultimately potentially build a new champion within those offices. So our three kind of extroverted roles, we've got our introducer who's going to introduce everybody, keep the conversation in the right direction, a storyteller who's going to give their personal experience about why this is important, and then a fact knower to back that up with the facts, the figures, the money, that kind of stuff. Now, for people who, like me, are not always super comfortable kind of talking in these meetings, we need a note taker who's responsible of keeping track of what happened during the meeting. So these things include what you talked about. What was the representative's response to this? Was it positive or negative? Did they have any follow-up questions? Did they ask anything that you weren't able to answer, like we just mentioned? And to keep track of that so that we know how those conversations went. And whenever we go back to the General Assembly as an organization looking to advance more policy, we know who we can start with, where we need to work, and what we need to do to move things forward. It's important that a note taker is thorough and detailed so that we can know how things went and where we can focus in the future. And it's really important to include both the positive and the negative things that happen in the meeting. Not everything is going to be hunky-dory in all of these meetings. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of pushback. Sometimes some people may seem, even if they're not rude, a little bit dismissive or a little bit apathetic. And it's important that we know that, so we know what's going on in those rooms and that we can follow up from there. And it's also important, of course, for keeping track of any follow-up that will help us stay in contact with these representatives. And then, of course, because we know that we are a social media hungry people, it's always good to be active and engaged in social media. So if somebody in your group wants to kind of be in charge of navigating the Instagram and Twitter and all that kind of stuff, you can take photos with your group, ask for photos with the participants and your representatives that you're talking with, and share things that happen during the meeting. Almost all of the representatives have Twitter accounts and Instagram accounts and love for you to tweet and I don't know, Instagram at them. I don't know what the wording is. But that's a really easy and good way to engage with them and stay engaged with them. And we know that we're social media hungry people. So it's also a chance to share the day for those who may not be able to make it to Raleigh next week, and let the world know why this advocacy is so important. So those are our 5 kind of key roles. This is very much a blueprint. You can't know exactly how a conversation or a meeting is going to go, but it's good to kind of plan it out so that you can have something to fall back on if the meeting does start to go a little bit astray. So we really like to use these roles so that we have a clear understanding of how to make these meetings happen. Here are some really important tips and tricks when it comes to meetings with legislative meetings. First and foremost, legislative schedules can change super quickly and representatives can be pulled into meetings on super short notice. So we got to stay flexible and nimble. It can be really frustrating when you have a meeting scheduled and you show up and you find out that the representative is not there. But it happens all the time. We get emails up until 5 minutes before the meeting's supposed to happen of needing to change stuff. So just be flexible. It happens. It's not the worst. And if you don't have a scheduled meeting with the representative, or even if you showed up to a meeting and they're no longer available, it's still important to drop by and talk with their legislative assistants or their LAs, because they're still a great contact to make and honestly really direct a lot of what happens in those offices. So even if you're not talking to the representative in particular or specifically, their LAs are still great points of contact to kind of sow that seed. And they're the ones who fill their calendars and kind of decide what's going on within the office. So it's really good to make those connections with those folks. As we mentioned earlier, of course, you don't want to make anything up. It's okay to not know the answer. In the same front, if the representative says something that is against what we believe in, against science, stigmatizing, it's okay to disagree with them respectfully. It's important to prepare what you're going to say in advance so that you're not stumbling over yourself. That's kind of why we created this blueprint. And then, of course, you want to stay on topic and stick to your message, because remember, you are the expert in these situations. So it's important that you take control of these conversations because you know what the subject matter is. You are the expert of the subject matter, and they are there first and foremost to work for you. So it's their job to listen to you. So don't be afraid to speak your mind. Now, the actual day. We've gone over kind of what to expect when you're in a meeting, but what does the day look like? So here's kind of our full rundown of the schedule of the day. So registration and breakfast is going to start at 8:30 a.m. at the North Carolina Museum of History. So we'll have registration from 8:30 to 9:30, as well as breakfast during that time. And then at 9:30, we'll begin our opening plenary session, where we will have a couple of remarks from some state officials. We'll go over our policy agenda again. And then we'll also have a really cool faith-based panel of folks who are working in HIV who are also working in the faith space. And we're going to talk about the intersection of faith and HIV and how we can better engage with faith communities. So that'll be our opening program. And that will go until around 10:30 a.m. Directly after that, we will go out into the staircase of the museum and take a group photo. We always like to kind of flood the General Assembly with red to kind of represent HIV and kind of make ourselves known. So if you have red, wear red. I think it's great. And then after that, it is legislative meetings from 11 to 3. So every single person has a House member and a Senate member, and you will be put in groups with people from your delegation or your surrounding area. And from 11 to 3, we'll make scheduled meetings with your various House members and Senate members. So you'll be on your own at that point with your group to kind of break out. You'll have your packets with your information to give them one-pagers and whatnot. And so from 11 to 3 is kind of you just navigating the General Assembly and going to these meetings. Now, during this time, you also have lunch break. Everybody at registration will receive a voucher that you can use in the cafeteria at the North Carolina General Assembly. You'll just get your food, hand them the voucher, and then you are good to go. You don't have to pay for your lunch. And so that'll be from 11 to 3. And then for folks who do want to stick around, we will have a little bit of an after party that we call Advocacy After Hours from 5 to 7 at a local wine bar called the Hippo, which is several blocks from the NC General Assembly. So here's the museum address, 5 East Edenton Street. That's where we'll start the day. There's also parking around there, which we'll get to later. But breakfast and registration, 8:30 to 9:30. Opening program, 9:30. Legislative meetings start at 11. So when you get there at the museum sometime between 8:30 and 9:30, at registration, you will receive your personal folder. And on your folder, it'll have a little sticker with your name, the name of your representatives, their office numbers. If we were able to schedule with your representative, it'll have the time of your meeting beside their name as well. If you are not scheduled, that means we didn't hear back from those offices. That's okay. We still recommend dropping into those offices and at least talking with the LAs. And there might be a chance that the representative is there, which would be great. But in case not, it's always good to drop into those offices. Inside your folder, you will also find your full team schedule meeting. So the front is going to be just those meetings for your specific representative so that you know whenever you're in those meetings, if you are a constituent of those representatives. Inside the folder will be everybody in your team, the meetings that were able to be scheduled for those representatives. You will also receive 2 one-pager leave behinds for your specific representatives. So with each meeting, you want to make sure you give a one-pager, which has our policy asks for it. We'll put 2 in every packet just to make sure that we have enough. There will be some double dipping. Not everybody will get rid of them, but that's okay. You'll also receive several policy handouts to help in your meetings with some talking points and some data and whatnot to help kind of navigate the conversation. So maybe a representative does ask you a question that you may not know, but it may be in your policy talking point to where you can kind of point toward it. So those will be in there as well, along with your lunch voucher, which will be used in the cafeteria, which is in the basement of the legislative building, which we will go over. We'll also have some fun swag. And then we will also, for those who are interested or who will need it, we will have some reimbursement for parking available for those who need it. So after registration, after the morning program, that all takes place in the same place at the museum, we will then move over to the General Assembly, which is 1 block away from the museum. So after you receive your packet of registration with your scheduled visits, the office locations of your representatives of policy materials will be on that packet and will tell you where in the General Assembly to go. As I mentioned, you'll be assigned to a group with folks from your area of the state. The meetings will happen between 11 and 3. And then meetings, I will note, will take place in both the LB or legislative building and the LOB, the legislative office building. The General Assembly building that is the 1 block from the museum is the legislative building, the LB. It is this one in this picture. You will walk straight into it. And then there's another building called the legislative office building, which is on the other side of this building. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute. As someone who has been doing this since 2016 and before that even, the legislative building is a maze. I get lost every single time I go in it. So don't be concerned if you get a little bit turned around. It's confusing in the way that it's written. So the main building of the NCGA, which is the one where the chambers are and where several of the member offices are, is the legislative building, which is the first one you go into. And all of the rooms in this building will have 4 digits as their office number. So there's 4 different courts. There's the 1000, the 1100, the 1200, and the 1300 court. And the room numbers are 4 digits based on those. So for the 1000 court, it's 10, whatever the last 2 are, 1100, 11, the last 2, 1200, 12, so forth and so on. There's also a couple of second floor offices. And with those, it would just start with a 2, but same gist. So office numbers with the 4 digits will take place in the legislative building. And this is also where our team will be stationed and where lunch will happen. So if you look at the red arrow on the bottom of this picture, this is the entrance when you're coming in from the museum. This is the Jones Street entrance. And then that court directly to your right when you come in is the 1000 court. Someone from the NCAN staff will be stationed in that 1000 court throughout the day. So that's the court directly to the right upon entering from the museum. Somebody will be there all day long. So if you have any questions, have any concerns, you can hop right over there and ask us anything. You'll also see the 2 hamburgers. So hamburger in the middle, which is in between the 1100 and 1200 court. That is the elevator that will take you down to the basement for the cafeteria. There is also a set of stairs right in the corner of the 1100 court. I'll have a couple of these printed off just so we have them, just so folks will get super lost. But just remember, I think the biggest thing is for legislative building is anything with 4 numbers. Now, as I mentioned, there's a second building called the LOB or Legislative Office Building. So if you have any meetings that have 3 digits, that will be in the Legislative Office Building. So when you go, I'm going to go back to this page, into the Legislative Building where we first enter with the 4 numbers. The main entrance that we come into is the Jones Street entrance. The entrance on the complete opposite side is the back entrance that will take you to the bridge that will take you to the legislative office building. I know that is clear as mud, but I will see if I can. No. Anyway, okay. So the front building in the front with the four little pyramids is the legislative building. Front entrance. If you go out the back and to your left, that's the legislative office building. It's a large gray building directly to the left once leaving the NCGA in what's called Halifax Mall. The exit is between the 1100 and 1200 courts. And I will note when you enter the LOB, you will be on the third floor. So if you have a meeting in, say, room 323 in the LOB, when you go into that building, you're on the right floor. You're already on the third floor. So I think the majority of the offices are on the fifth floor, so you go up 2 floors, but 3 digits LOB, 4 digits LB. I know it's clear as mud. Couple of things to note whenever you're entering the General Assembly. When you enter both the legislative building and the legislative office building, you'll have to go through some metal detectors and send all of your belongings through a conveyor belt with x-rays, similar to like TSA. It's important whenever you go through those security lines, when you're putting your bags through, any larger electronics and keys will need to be removed from your bags. The keys thing always throws me off. It throws everybody off. So we'll try and remember to say this during the opening program as well, but go ahead and plan to have your keys out of your bag so you're not digging through it and holding up the line. And your pockets will need to be emptied, very similar to TSA. I will note the process can get a little bit backed up, especially if there's a bunch of people at the building that day. So in between meetings, if you know that you need to be somewhere at 12 o'clock and it's 11:30, give yourself a little bit of ample time to get over to a new building and go through security just to make sure that you're not late to your meeting. It can be a little bit hung up if you get a little bit late. It is not the end of the world, but just to make sure that you know, every time that you go in and out of the legislative and legislative office building, you're going to have to go back through security, which is frustrating, but it's what it is. Now, parking, there is a lot of different parking in downtown Raleigh. Downtown Raleigh is a grid that can get a little bit confusing with the one ways and the two ways and whatnot. But the two easiest parking areas are the Green Square parking deck, which is about a block and a half away from the museum. You'll see that with the gold star on the left side, Green Square parking deck. That is a covered deck. There is also an open air deck about a block away from the museum that's actually closer to the NCGA, which is the lot on Wilmington Street. It is these two addresses. We'll be sending out some follow-up emails tomorrow and Monday with this information so that you have it. But those are the two probably the easiest parking places to prevent yourself from getting a parking ticket or getting towed. So those are probably the best places for you to go park. With that, I know I went through a lot and I went through it quick. I will pause there, exit out of my screen share, and see if we have any questions.
Matt, did you mention, do we get name tags?
Yes, sorry.
I
Yes,
missed it.
you will have name tags at registration as well.
Okay.
Yes, those should be ideally in your folders. If they're not in your folders, we'll have them laid out on a table.
Okay.
Also, we did record this, so when Matt sends the information out, it may have the link, is that right, Matt? So that if you have other staff or friends or whatever that's coming, you could send the link and they could watch.
Yes, I'll be uploading this to YouTube once it processes on my computer, and then we can send it out to everybody who registered for this. And then we'll probably send it out to people who didn't register for this, but for registered for the event, and kind of bug them with it so that they hopefully watch it.
Thank you, Matt.
Any other questions? I know I flew through that pretty quickly. I think my biggest takeaway is the NCGA is a confusing and place to navigate, but the 4 digits in the legislative building and the 3 digits in the LOB are the most important thing and will help you kind of like center as to where your meetings are.
And
I-
people are very helpful also. People are really helpful in the building, and you'll be with a group. And more than likely, someone in your group has been there before, so they would be able to help. And we'll all be kind of around also.
Yes, and question in the chat from Eugenia asking when will you determine each role? So between going from the plenary session to when your meetings are, you'll have a little bit of time to kind of figure out with your group who does what. We'll also make sure that each group does have somebody who's done this before so that they can kind of help navigate the first meeting or so until folks get comfortable. So within your groups, you'll be able to figure that out for sure.
Also, Maggie, while we're here, do you want to say anything about the videos and the kind of pop up, quick sayings that you'll be doing on that day?
Yeah, sure. So, we will have a social media toolkit available. I will be sending that out to folks before, so you can kind of look over like what hashtags we're going to use, some different like tweet and caption options. But we love when people get pictures of your group, especially with legislators, and legislators also love taking pictures with groups of people from their region. So, if you're whether you're the social media whiz in the group or you're just somebody in the group, make sure to remind everybody to get a picture with your legislator before you leave. I'll get some like hashtags in there so that you guys can send it. But it did look like we had one person, Erica, who isn't in here anymore, was interested in making some content. So if you are, or you know somebody who might be, just reach out to me before and I'll email Erica too. And we can talk about how you could make some content that works for you and that you like, and that NCAN can use it as well.
All right. Well, as they said, growing up in the Southern Baptist Church, if all hearts and minds are clear, I will let y'all have your rest of your Thursday evening back. Feel free to reach out. I will drop my information. That is my email in the chat. Feel free to drop me with any questions. We'll also be sending out a couple of communications between tomorrow and Tuesday. But we're so excited for Tuesday. It's going to be a great day full of advocacy. We look forward to seeing y'all all there and hope y'all have a great rest of your night and a great weekend. Bye, everyone. Thanks.